Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title is First Amendment Under Attack Again? Trump's Move to Control Media. You know, before the election, we had certain media companies, we might refer to them as legacy media, the Washington Post, the LA Times, they backed off. They backed off on having their papers endorse a candidate, which is a rich tradition, prior to the election. And they backed off, and Jeff Bezos, who's the owner of the Washington Post, he certainly backed down. And why did he back down? Well, as we're starting to see, a lot of media company owners are trying to genuflect, bend the knee to Donald Trump to make sure they don't get on his bad side. And in this case, Jeff Bezos did exactly that. He has billions of dollars in contracts with the federal government, and I'm certain that he had concerns of some of those contracts being placed in jeopardy. We've had kind of a migration of traditional journalists that are finding issues with the companies they work for, specifically Jennifer Rubin, who was a premier editorial columnist at the Washington Post. She has left the Post after many years and has opened up her own shop called The Contrarian. Now, we're starting to see these restrictions, and is it this through intimidation, or do they see something we don't? Now, on the other hand, Donald Trump just signed an executive order called the Restoring Freedom and Speech, Ending Federal Censorship. And what that's all about is accusations that the Biden administration tampered down speech on social media concerning COVID-19 and the January 6th. So we have this kind of juxtaposition of what's going on with media and how that may or may not be impacting our First Amendment rights, and also other parts of the First Amendment that we're starting to see some sea changes to. And so with that, I would like to introduce my special esteemed guests. With us today, new, that we haven't seen for a long time, Jeff Portnoy, partner of Cade Schutte. Thank you. We have Ben Davis, Professor Emeritus of Law at the University of Toledo. And we have Chuck Crumpton, mediator extraordinaire and attorney. And of course, my trusted co-host, CEO of ThinkTech Hawaii, Jay Fidell. Gentlemen, good morning. Jay, right off the bat to you. Out of the many now appears to be hundreds of executive orders that have been signed by Donald Trump, which ones do you think that you find troublesome pertaining to the future of the First Amendment here in the United States? And have you seen anything since his administration that may be putting some restrictions on our First Amendment rights?
Yesterday, Carolyn Levitt, his press secretary, had a meeting with the press. And a couple of things came out that I thought were interesting. One is she said she will always tell the truth. And that's, that's a pretty ambiguous term these days. And she said she expects they will tell the truth. And that's likewise ambiguous. It appears that Trump has allowed back into his press conferences, re-qualified some, he said, she said, 440 journalists who Joe Biden had excluded. I didn't know that he excluded anybody, but now they're back in. And there are certain news organizations that are back in, including, there are others too, but Breitbart, remember Breitbart? I think what we have is a shift in the journalists who are going to appear in these press conferences. Such as they are, because Trump doesn't have a lot of press conferences, but he's changed the way he talks to the press. The other thing I think is very interesting is, you talked about Jen Rubin. There's a movement, of course, to the second tier, the podcast tier, by the Democrats, by those who would quit the Washington Post in order to find a more reliable platform that's independent. But let me tell you also that there's a similar movement for the right wing to create podcasts. So don't be all optimistic about podcasts. Fact is, there are more left-wing podcasts, but there are also more right-wing podcasts. And it would appear that the legacy media is ultimately going to shrink, and the podcast level is going to expand. Where that goes, we don't yet know. But we do know that that's Trump's next big initiative: shut down the press. One other thing I want to mention before I go here is that you have to watch out for the flood effect. People criticize him for his flood of executive orders. Well, it's not the only flood. If I have, say, X, or this new TikTok where the government owns half of it, that's what he's got on his mind. Then what happens is I can flood. This is akin, to can you cry fire in a crowded theater? If I have X or TikTok, and I have, say, I don't know, 100 million listeners, and at the same time, what I do is I set it up with the algorithm so that my message, the Elon Musk message and the Trump message, reaches all of them and has lots of exposure, but the algorithm slows down or somehow reduces the number of messages that get through from the left-hand side of things, from the Democratic bubble.
Okay.
Now, it's not calling fire in a crowded theater, but it is also not allowing for the message to get through on an ideological basis. And it is a limitation, clearly a limitation on the First Amendment.
Okay. Just quick follow-up, Jay. You and I many times criticized Donald Trump for limiting the number or certain reporters that were at his press conferences. And granted, you can only allow so many reporters in the room. We know that. I wasn't aware that Joe Biden did the same thing. And is it right for any president to, say there's certain reporters that he doesn't want to see or she doesn't want to see in the future because they're critical. They're doing their job. Is that a right thing for a president to bar entry of press reporters' entry?
No, it's not. And if we want to have the First Amendment, we have to allow them in if they have, professional credentials of some kind. If, for example, ThinkTech wanted to go in there, we should be permitted, I think. We just not in Washington. Carolyn Levitt said that Trump had allowed another 440 members of the press in to these conferences, qualified them. I'm not sure that's true. It doesn't sound true to me. It doesn't sound true that Biden excluded them. That doesn't sound true. So I don't know what part of that is true, and
Okay.
I don't know how much truth we're going to get from her.
Jeff, same question to you. What of all the executive orders or recent statements of the past week and a half from the new Trump administration, do you find the most troublesome as it pertains to the First Amendment and where we are or are not going with restrictions or not restrictions of our First Amendment rights?
How much time do you have?
Not much. We have other guests.
I mean, there's not much left, is there? I mean, I don't even know where to start. First of all, we're in the era now from the top down of alternative truths. Let's just be real about it. Facts are no longer facts. Facts are lies. For Trump's press secretary to stand there and say she's going to only tell the truth when her boss is known for never telling the truth. Just look at CNN. They're going out of their minds trying to fact check every single thing that comes out of his mouth. And I don't know what percentage, but more than half are false. It's kind of ironic that she says, I'm always going to tell you the truth. Whose truth? Secondly, as far as crediting people to go to press conferences, I have no idea what's going on, but my guess is that Trump is allowing every single person that has anything to say on the internet press access because he knows that they're going to parrot exactly what he's trying to say. And it's perhaps Biden and every other president, you had to have a press pass to go into the White House press room. I've been in that room. It's not much bigger than my office. You're lucky you get 44 people in there, let alone 440 people. But part of this is the Democrats' fault. There's no question that the Biden administration tried to censor what Facebook and others were saying about certain things that happened with COVID. I think that's clearly, they tried to convince them to censor positions that they thought were untruthful. And so now they're getting it back in spades. And so it's a little hard for them now to stand there and rant and rave about the president's efforts to manage the news. I mean, this is a dictatorship in training. It's exactly what's going on. The only news that Trump wants, and when he signs this executive order, is the news that he believes, or the facts, the alternative facts that he believes the country needs to know. And so he loves being before the media. Biden, of course, was the opposite, and that was one of the criticisms of Biden, and legitimate ones, that he hardly ever had a press conference. You saw Trump sitting in his office for an hour and a half just answering any inane question just so he could go on and on and on about everything he does. He loves the publicity. That's how he got his start on television. So here's my point. The Democrats caused some of this. It's a reaction. But what's going to happen now is the definition of free speech. And it's going to undergo much change because it's going to be the era of alternative facts. And yes, were there efforts to censor some of the right-wing commentators who were spewing out complete falsehoods? You can argue whether that's a legitimate thing to do or not. But Trump is going to react the other way. And the news you're going to get now is the same news you used to get from Pravda in the Soviet Union. And yes, you're also right about this. I just want to finish the whole thought. What the Washington Post did and the LA Times, by not using their newspapers to do presidential endorsements and coming up with absurd explanations about why they weren't, when it was so transparent, it was in reaction to Trump, looking at his inauguration and seeing all the media moguls sitting in the first row. I'm talking about the real media moguls, the Facebooks, the Elon Musks, and people like that. Get ready. That's who's going to control what you call the traditional news, because Trump knows he doesn't need them, doesn't want them, and he's going to let anybody that wants to post on any site to say what he wants people to hear. That's where we are.
Excellent points. Thank you very much. Chuck, to what Jeff just said, at the signing of the new law regarding immigration, the Laken-Riley Act, Trump said there's a new media, and he's blaming the old media for inaccuracies. He's blaming the old media for creating fear and panic about government funding shutdowns. He said that's not true. They made it all up. So the new media seems to be, as Jeff just pointed out, podcasts and social media. Jay, you might want to be getting your press pass to Washington, D.C., the Oval Office, since we're now the new media. The point is there a new media, Chuck? Do you agree with Jeff on that point? And to what degree does Trump, through his oligarchs, have a filter or a control on this new media?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, Jeff is exactly right. Social media has for years taken over as the initial and primary source of information for a great majority of people. And Jay and Jeff are also right that rather than what we think of traditionally as censorship, burying the truth under a barrage of misinformation, disinformation, falsity, and lies is probably the greatest current threat to the First Amendment. Exactly what Jeff's talking about. Alternative facts is the euphemism of a century for flat out intentional barrages of lies that have been shown by studies to have their intended effect of getting people to go along with what those falsehoods are saying.
If you say enough times that the Nazis did a good thing and continue to say it, read Lord of the Flies, read 1984, which now becomes 2025. Mm-hmm. Just read those books that were written at the time about autocratic governments and how they control information and what people believe. That's where we are now.
You know what? It's automatic. You don't have to repeat it. The algorithm will repeat it for you. And that's what's been happening, and that will happen increasingly. And when half of TikTok, very popular, gets to be owned by the government, and the government, of course, is Trump. You're going to see Elon Musk on one side of the equation, Trump on the other side. They're going to use the same algorithms.
Yeah. Before I go to you, Ben, I'd just like to say that two of the biggest principles of propaganda, one is the big lie, stating the big lie, and secondly is repeating the big lie. Propaganda at its best. Okay, thank you all. Ben, to you. You know, in this new executive order restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship, that's a mouthful, by the way. Pam Bondi, our new Attorney General, said that she's going to ensure that no federal tax dollars or federal officers shall be used to abridge such rights in the media. But another provision of this executive order is the Attorney General will go back and investigate the past 4 years of those who could be accused of interfering with the social media companies. What do you think that's all about? Is this retribution, or is this really a smokescreen on one hand to give the impression to the American people that Donald Trump's all about the freedom of expression?
I would just start by saying that Jeff, Chuck, Jay, I really appreciate the use of the term lie, okay? Not alternative facts, just lie. I think it's important because this is the kind of newspeak stuff that happens that we got from eight or so years ago. And so, yes, there are the freedom of speech order is not a freedom of speech order. It's if you have to think of everything as the opposite of what it says it is, and then you're probably close to the truth. Obviously, going after the folks who allegedly done things over the last 4 years is about weaponization of the Department of Justice, right? I mean, that's another part of that game that we've seen. So let me give you a couple things right now today, okay? And I will start by just saying, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, I shut off my Twitter account. When Jeff Bezos blocked the endorsement of Harris, I got rid of my subscription with the Washington Post, okay? And when Zuckerberg bent the knee, I canceled my Facebook, all right? I have just now, today, joined Blue Sky for a little while. Okay. Why do I say all that? Because here is how insane things are at this moment. When President Trump just signed this Lincoln-Riley Act, he said he's going to be sending the various bad guy immigrants to Gitmo, to the place where we hold Haitians, and he said it's going to be 30,000 places there. Back when Clinton did this, the maximum that it ever was 12,500, okay? And that went down to 272, and apparently today there are 120 beds there in Gitmo. Not anywhere near 30,000, yet he made it sound like there's 30,000 ready to go, okay? That was like literally today. Secondly, you remember this thing today about rescinding the executive order about the freezing everything with regards to spending? I have a letter that just came out from the government of Botswana saying it is not receiving the AIDS funds the United States has supposed to give because of this freeze, okay? So what you're hearing is we have rescinded the order. But when you look in the real world, you have to ask yourself, who is getting the money now? Now you're going to say, am I saying that these people lie? Oh, no. What I am saying is that if you can lie about the 2020 election, you can lie about anything. Mm-hmm. And this is the reality that we live in at this moment. So, understand all of this effort as just feeding us lies and using social media to propagandize us. And the question for everyone, I think, is what is too much? For example, we lost 1 million people during COVID. They died. I know there's some guy on TV said he lost 16 members of his family. When misinformation, disinformation, the kind of Kennedy-esque stuff, since he's up testifying today, tells people things that are not true about a vaccine, right? People die. There is an argument that can be made that there is a certain amount of what I call public interest in limiting that kind of speech, even under a strict scrutiny vision of freedom of press. Because why? Because people die. Understand? Humans, Americans die. I'm not saying that Biden didn't screw up on other things. I will stipulate to that. But I'm just going to say, let's focus on a few things like that when there is a public interest, boring as that may sound, to actually have accurate information. Here's another one. A disaster in California, a disaster in North Carolina. People getting accurate information. Is that a situation where there could be some reduction of the propaganda? You know, I think that there is an argument that there is a public interest in those kind of settings for people to get accurate information because people die.
Don't we have that in the form of the government websites, Department of Health websites? I don't think anyone really tunes in on those all that much, but in a sense, don't we have government-sponsored communications trying to discern between facts and fiction?
No more.
No more.
No more.
I mean, you fire all the inspector generals
Right.
from each of the departments because they are the only way to get in the way of false information. You now control every single department. There's been an executive order that tells the communications people what they can say and what they can't say going forward. So yes, up until 2 weeks ago, you could look at the Department of Health website and hope to get accurate information. Was some of it slanted? Maybe it was, but the overwhelming majority were true. That has ended, folks. That's over. I wouldn't look at a government website starting today for the next 4 years because it's all going to be misinformation.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Hey, Jay, to you, because for a long time now, you have been saying that once Trump comes back, we're not going to know what's going on. But what Jeff is suggesting is we'll know what's going on, but it won't be the truth. It will be some fabrication of what the facts used to be. You remember those days when you were saying that?
Yeah. Well, it's happening. I mean, Jeff is right. That is a really chilling executive order, because what it says is these health agencies will not be able to promulgate any information, any websites, any email, any messaging at all, unless approved by an official of the White House. I think that's the language, an official of the White House. And that means Trump. So he's going to control what they say. And if they want to, misstate the numbers of the next pandemic, they will. In fact, he'll cause them to do that. You don't realize he'll not only, censor what they have to say, he'll tell them what they have to say. He'll be the only oracle of knowledge. The other thing I wanted to say is that we haven't covered this, I don't think. And that is that the legacy media, the mainstream media, is under attack right now. And they are doing anticipatory acquiescence to what Trump wants. And there was this guy on CNN who quit recently. He was a straight talker. He was criticizing Trump. So Trump didn't like him, and Trump must have made that known. I'm sure he did make that known to CNN, and CNN acquiesced in advance, or maybe on instruction, and put him at the midnight hour. And the result is that he quit. Okay, so what you have is this good, legitimate journalist leaving, and Jen Rubin leaves, and a lot of the others are going to leave. You also have them being attacked, swatted, threatened, midnight phone calls. Those guys who were released, those insurrection felons who were released, may attack them, call them, even attack them physically. And so, the mainstream media is under attack, and after a while, it really will devolve on the secondary tier of media.
let me go to this example of that very thing. I'm thinking of as a background, Times versus Sullivan. ABC just paid out $15 million for the George Stephanopoulos story about E. Jean Carroll's case, where he used the word rape versus sexual assault. Now, in New York City, rape is defined very narrowly versus most other states where rape is clearly defined as, penetration. And that certainly was the situation here with the E. Jean Carroll case versus Donald Trump. Did ABC settle that because they were concerned about further, license scrutiny with the FCC and Donald Trump's long arm of his control? Or did they sell it because they had a legitimate fear that they were using some kind of a defamation against Donald Trump?
Let me answer it briefly. The former. They settled it out of intimidation. Was it the greatest news story ever in the history of ABC? Was there some ambiguity in the term because of the New York law? Forget that. Okay, they settled it from intimidation, but the suit you ought to be really focusing on in this conversation is the one against the Des Moines Register, because there's no question. That's where they posted poll numbers from the most esteemed pollster in Iowa that had Trump losing. Now, he won the election. He's suing. He's suing for writing the poll results. You want to talk about what this country has turned into? That's the lawsuit that I think people should be focusing on, not whether, is the definition of rape protected under Times versus Sullivan. And I deal with this all the time. Look at the lawsuit against the Des Moines Register, and you're looking at the end of a legitimate media just from the threat and the filing of that lawsuit.
Now, that's a private lawsuit. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's Trump versus the Des Moines Register.
Right, but he's using private funds, not government funds, to attack the Des Moines Register.
I don't know whose funds he's using, but what's the difference?
Well, it makes a big difference. I mean, if you're using unlimited assets from the federal government to attack the First Amendment versus his own private coffers, that's a huge difference.
I think he filed it before he was president, so it would probably.
Let me add a point that he is, as president now, he's able to get the biggest, best law firms in the country to represent him ostensibly for free, even when the federal government is not paying the tab. For example, we thought that Judge Juan Ferron, is it?
Merchan?
In New York?
We thought that Juan Merchan was buying a little peace by giving him a conviction without a penalty, without any punishment at all. We thought that Trump would not appeal that. Well, I'm here to tell you, and we predicted this, that he is appealing it. But what strikes me so devastatingly is who is representing him. Do you know the answer, Jeff? It's Sullivan and Cromwell. The biggest, or one of the biggest law firms on Wall Street is representing him.
And Jay, how much money do you think Sullivan and Cromwell is making in legal fees by representing the government in multiple matters? Billions over the years, and billions more to come.
Okay. Thank you,
that's
everyone.
That's why they're not charging him to represent him in what is a private lawsuit, a private prosecution.
All right. Thank you for those points. Chuck, we're going to run out of time here, but I want to get this out to you. Fox paid over, $700 million in their defamation suit to Dominion. Giuliani paid, maybe he's been charged, I think $140 million in his defamation suit. Is this the only way to enforce our First Amendment rights is through defamation suits? Or where are we at with how to address First Amendment abuses by the federal government or individuals? What's the pathway to uphold our First Amendment rights?
It's a great question, but that's really Jeff's area of expertise. I'm going to defer to the senior counsel
I'm trying to
of
spread the
First
love
Amendment.
Here. Okay.
There will be time.
I defer back to Chuck.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what it is.
No, Jay, I defer to Chuck, not to you.
Okay, well, I'm just going to
Okay.
slip in between the two of you guys and tell you the man has to be impeached. That's the only way. You can't control Congress, and you're not sure of the New York Times versus Sullivan case in the Supreme Court. The only way is to get rid of this president.
Okay. Chuck, do you have a different opinion?
You've got a guy with 34 felony counts, convictions. And under our Constitution, he can run for president. He can actually be elected president, right? The conviction stands, but for reasons of his own, and here I would, again, defer to Ben, Jay, and Jeff, what are his reasons for wanting to get rid of the conviction itself? What does that open up for him that the convictions might be an obstacle to?
Well, I don't know, but I think the motivation is to continue to tell people it's a rigged system and that he never should have been prosecuted in the first place. And it plays off of what he's been talking about since 2020, that the whole system was rigged against him. How many people in the Justice Department have they fired? Have they transferred and have quit in the first 2 weeks of his administration? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He takes away security from Anthony Fauci. What kind of lesson does that send to private citizens who want to criticize the government? We are in a horrible, horrible situation, much worse than many of us predicted, which is hard to believe. And it's only 2 weeks into this administration. Thank God there are still some federal judges who in the last 2 weeks have put an immediate stop to some of his garbage. We'll see how long the courts can continue to protect the citizens.
Thank you. Jeff. Ben, you know, we have a federal whistleblower law. They've proven to be very, very valuable in cases such as Dr. Wygan and against big tobacco and landmark situations that have come up thanks to whistleblowers. Not an envious person to be a whistleblower, but you know, there were protections. Do those get watered down with this new administration and their ability to come out and speak truth to power?
Yeah, they do. And let me suggest, this is the way I kind of actually was thinking about it today, because when Leavitt was being the press secretary, and you're talking about the firing of the inspector generals and the career prosecutors at this Department of Justice, she referred to a case from 2020 called Siley versus the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So I actually went and got that decision and read it, right? Okay. And, you know, there's basically a couple of exceptions to sort of presidential power that are highlighted there. And basically, the majority took the point of view that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau didn't fit through the exception, and we're not going to make a new one. So therefore, you know, they severed a certain part of the legislation. Okay. So that got me thinking of this. There's a famous case called Youngstown, okay? And in the case called Youngstown, there's basically Justice Jackson said this three-part vision of a tripartite vision of presidential power. First, when the president is acting also under his constitutional powers and powers granted by Congress, his powers are at his zenith, okay? The express or implied given by Congress. Then, if the president acts and Congress has not said anything, his powers are not as high, but, you know, there's kind of a back and forth between him and the Congress. And then the third is, if the president acts against something that Congress has done, right, his powers are at their lowest. They're just his constitutional powers. So what I think I see going on here is essentially that the president is asserting his constitutional powers are vaster than probably any other president we've ever seen. Consequently, even if Congress has passed legislation, he's got this residual constitutional power to do vast things. And also he can grab here and there from various congressional actions to assert he's got more of the zenith powers.
Let me just say this, Ben, doesn't the SCOTUS decision of immunity really accelerate what he's doing right now?
Absolutely. That's the second part. Absolutely. And that accelerates it. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
he doesn't need to worry about it because he controls both houses
Yeah.
of Congress. They're doing everything he wants.
Oh,
I
no,
mean,
I agree.
let's
I agree.
face the reality. There are no three branches of government anymore. At the moment, there are two. There's Trump branch and there's the courts. Congress is a joke. So it's not like he's exercising any powers that Congress would disagree with. He just calls them and tells them, this is what I want. And we see one instance after another. We'll see what happens today with Robert Kennedy. If he gets approved, my point has been made in spades.
Right. Okay.
Well, it was
Excellent.
made with Hegsid already. You're just getting a confirmation. Okay.
That's true.
That's true. Okay. Excellent points. We've run out of time, so let's go around the table. Jay, start with you as your last thoughts on this topic.
I'd like to make 2 points. One is we've seen him gut the EEOC. We've seen him gut the NLRB. The FCC is next. And he has a playbook on how he's going to knock off the legacy media. And that would be part of it. That's a sort of the Fort Sumter part of it. And then he'll go from there. He's already intimidated them and their broadcasters. He will go much further to knock them off. The other thing is, and I don't know this for sure, maybe Jeff does, in the pipeline somewhere, in the appeal pipeline, there must be an issue around Sullivan versus the New York Times, which is really important to all journalism and all truth telling, actually. And that is likely to get to the Supreme Court one of these days. And when it gets there, I am not confident that they will uphold Sullivan versus the New York Times.
There's only 2 justices, Jay, who have expressed an interest in reversing that. I think it may get there, but I don't think it may get chipped away. It won't be obliterated.
There you go, chipped away. So in any event, that's the bulwark, if you don't mind me using
Yeah.
that term. To the extent that that can stand, the legacy media is at least somewhat, all media is somewhat protected. To the extent it gets reversed or chipped away, that is really the end. But in the meantime, don't forget, what Putin has done with social media and what Trump will do if he controls the 2 largest, make that the 3 largest social media, companies, platforms in the world.
Okay.
It's not only that he will censor and pervert the truth here, but everywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. Chuck, you're next.
I think the examples that have been given, if you fire hundreds of career officials in law enforcement in the Department of Justice, if you impound funds specifically authorized and directed by Congress, and you start to get calls, and that's both foreign aid funds as well as domestic support funds. What more truth suppressive, independence suppressive? You fire all the inspector generals. Where does it stop? That's my question.
Where does it stop? Okay. Thank you very much, Chuck. Ben, to you, your final thoughts.
I just moved over to Blue Sky. Okay. I'm not making an ad here. So I'll watch and see until Blue Sky gets captured by somebody. But in that, you have to do what we can to speak out about what's going on in whatever place we can to try to counteract the lies being thrown at us. Together is the only way I think we can do it. As Timothy Snyder said at the end of his book on tyranny, is said that unless there are people who are willing to die for freedom, you will lose your freedom to tyranny. And that was a really deep comment. It's 1 chapter, 1 sentence.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Jeff, you get the last word.
I just want to ask Jay not to put this out on social media because I don't want to be audited.
Well, actually, Jeff, we have discovered Substack, and we do put our stuff on Substack, but Substack is not social media like, X or Facebook or TikTok. It's more responsible.
Oh, Jeff, was that your final word?
No, I just think we're in a horrible, horrible situation. Democracy is at risk. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think every single day brings more and more evidence that we are moving to a quasi dictatorship. And again, I just repeat, free speech is an issue that I think just go to 1984, just go to Lord of the Flies, and how predicted those authors were of where we are and where we're going to be for the next 4 years. I just hope the lower courts, not anxious about the Supreme Court, but that the trial courts at the district level and the appellate courts will protect basic freedoms, because the executive and Congress will not.
Okay. And before I conclude, I'd just like to bring up a point, Jeff, that you made, and that is we should keep a very, very careful, close eye on the Trump versus Des Moines Register. I agree with you, Jeff. That is a paramount case that will really determine which way we're traveling in as far as our First Amendment rights. So thanks for bringing that up. I would like to thank my esteemed guests, starting with Ben Davis, Jeff Portnoy, Chuck Crumpton, and I'd like to thank my co-host, Jay Fidell. This is American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host. And why don't you join us next week? And until then, aloha.